Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, travellers of time and space. Welcome to another Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, your roadmap through the future. And what better guide to lead us up towards the horizon but Matthew Dickerson with his virtual compass and his digital sextant. How's your week been, Matt?
Well, I often talk about the fact that I'm a time traveller. I'm travelling through time at the moment,
yeah.
at 1 second per second.
That's right.
I haven't managed to work out a way to go to a different speed to that, but we are, as you say, all travelling through time at the moment. So it's just getting
you've been on a plane before, so you've changed that by microseconds.
Well, you're absolutely spot on. That's right. So not only 1 second per second, but a little 0.0 something percent.
Yeah, 0.0. Yeah.
So this week I actually had an interesting experience at a campus of Charles Street University, and they had some really cool agricultural tech. And I was quite intrigued by it and having a look at it. And it wasn't so much that they were creating the technology, which was my first impression. It's a concept called AgriPark.
Yeah, right. So it wasn't brand new stuff. It
wasn't brand new stuff. And I started looking at it, and I imagined that they were doing brand new developments. But as they talked to me about it and showing me what they were doing, it was clear that they weren't creating brand new things. What they were doing was they were taking fairly new things from different manufacturers, things that are basically commercialised or ready to be commercialised. And what they were doing was proof of concept. So that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So you take things, so for example, they had a trough, a watering trough that gave information back to the farmer about how much water was in the trough, how much they were using in terms of how much water was being used each day, alerts if the water dropped below a certain level so that then the sheep or the cattle obviously needed to get more water manually. It was obviously automatically feeding water in.
Yeah.
So just making sure that worked. And then they had another device there that would bring the cattle in, so it had something there that was attractive to them, some sort of stick they would lick and basically stand up on that. They put their front 2 feet on that. Feet's probably not the right word, but let's call them feet for the moment.
Or hooves.
Hooves might be better. And when they put their hooves there, that would weigh the cattle. So the farmer's getting a daily, at least daily update on the weight of the cattle so they can see whether they're being nourished correctly and whether they're suffering out in the heat or whatever it might be. So it was actually quite interesting. Probably my favourite part that I saw, there was a drone, and the drone had a fairly large chemical container as part of it, and that drone would go out and autonomously find weeds and then spot spray weeds.
Yeah.
So forget about going out with your farm equipment.
I think
and
we
spraying.
talked about something like this.
We have.
But 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that, but what I love about this is they run a farm and they're proving these concepts. So the manufacturer says, look at this great device, please buy it. And then the farmer says, well, I'll spend all that money on that if you can show me it works. And so that's when they can then turn to the CSU research and say, well, here is a trial done independently. Sure, we provided them the equipment. I'm sure they pay some money for it, but they've got to go and do that with their trial and all their research hats on rather than being paid money hat, and come up with the information that shows how well these things
Gives
work.
any evidence for that. Yeah. So I just got to pull you up there. You dropped a word there that I call a dirty word to all my students. That's the word prove in science. If someone's proving something, they're trying to sell you something. So we just give evidence to support.
Yeah, no.
So, but that's what these guys are doing, right? Yeah. So they're just providing evidence to show that that this is a good product and will do what the manufacturer is claiming, which is extremely valid.
Exactly right. And more than that, I think not only do what the manufacturer claims it will do, but also in the testing from a university perspective, they might say, well, here's what it does do at the moment, but what would make it even more useful would be these things. Now, some farmers might tell them, I'd like this thing added on, but they're probably going to listen to a university more than they would a farmer because they're doing this trial and they're providing evidence to show how something would be better. A couple of new interesting ones coming up. I did ask about the concept of sheep grazing under solar panels. We hear a little bit about that, where some farmers say that they lease out their land to a solar farm, but their sheep, they still live grazing and they drop their carrying capacity a little bit of the farm, but they still talk about the fact that their sheep are getting higher quality wool. Now, that's according to Jimmy, the farmer, whose wool is always the best wool in the whole district. So not exactly...
And anecdotal stuff is not the same.
The plural of anecdote is anecdotes, not data. So the idea there is, sure, people are talking about that, but I talked about that as a trial, and they've got two trials they're going to do. One is with solar panels and sheep, and basically having 2 yards side by side, so the same climatic conditions, one with some solar panels with X number of sheep, one next door with no solar panels, same number of sheep, same size, etc. Have all your controls in place, and then see if there is any proof to the idea that any evidence.
Oh, yeah,
evidence.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Good
Got to be
work,
careful.
Good work. You've taught me already. Any evidence to support the fact that the wool might be better quality. But the other one they're looking at is growing grapevines in amongst solar panels. Now,
Yeah,
I often
right.
joke that
Okay.
it's pretty hard to grow your wheat and get your header in through the solar panels, so you're going to lose the ability to grow wheat amongst solar panels. But I haven't thought of grapevines, and they said that by using the shading process of the solar panels and planting the grapevines in a certain way, they think they can actually produce better quality grapes by not having too much sun on the grapes.
Right.
Yeah, so-
Okay, and look, it makes sense as well, because you can fit a vine in between a row of solar panels.
Absolutely right.
And when you pick those grapes, whether it's with an automatic picker or otherwise, surely you could design your paddock to be able to.
The
to
solar
do that, your
panels
vineyard.
can go vertical, can go horizontal in terms of the ones that follow the sun across. So, it's picking time, flip all those solar panels vertical. Yes, we're not generating enough electricity at the moment, but we're doing that while we pick and then flip them back to where they should be. So, absolutely right. That made sense. So, anyway, it's quite fascinating. We're seeing technology in the farming sector. We've got 8 billion people to feed, so we've got to come up with other solutions. But having this sort of testing process, I thought was quite interesting. And it'd be quite fun. A manufacturer approaches you and said, hey, here's this thing. And I know I'd be saying, hey, cool, let's see if this actually works. Let's see if it does what you're
for
saying
sure.
it does. Yeah.
All right, well, today we're headed for the cool, deep waters of the Seven Seas with a bunch of marine stories for all the salty sea dogs amongst you. In the spirit of Jules Verne, we're looking for a better way to survey the ocean floor without the danger of getting squished by all those extra tons of deep water pressure that would otherwise spoil your day. And today we're going whale spotting in an effort to monitor ocean temperatures. And we're on a mission to save the fish stocks of the world and broaden the menu on those long and lonely missions to Mars with printable salmon steaks. But enough peeking through the curtain. Let's get in amongst it with our first story. Now, making news in just recently are a couple of stories where smartwatches took a front seat in saving lives. Matt, we often talk about how these devices shouldn't be regarded as actual medical devices, but in a couple of notable instances, they were instrumental in rapid and saving these people's lives.
Yeah, exactly right. And one of the things that we do talk about is how they'll monitor. So they'll keep an eye on your heart rate, or you can do some ECG tests or blood pressure tests. They all feel like big picture, long-term things to keep an eye on if things are changing, and then go and see your doctor. But there's a couple of stories here which I thought demonstrates the power of that smartwatch in terms of an emergency situation.
Yeah.
And the first one was a gentleman down in Victoria. He's named Bruce, which is a good Aussie name, isn't it? Bruce.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a skit about that.
That's right. And he had an accident with a kangaroo. Now, I've done exactly the same thing where I've been out riding my bike, going down a hill, a kangaroo, and I think it was a wallaby, not a kangaroo, so I'm probably being harsh on all the kangaroos out there, took me out and I broke 3 ribs. Now, I was lucky that I was riding with someone else who was there to talk to me and realise that I kept asking the same question over and over, so I thought it might be a bit concussed, and then tried to get back on my bike, and suddenly I had extreme pain across my chest, so he finally convinced me that maybe getting back on my bike wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, he rang someone, came and picked me up, and then took me to the hospital. So that was nice, but there are times you're out riding by yourself, and that's exactly what Bruce was doing. He was out riding by himself and got hit by a kangaroo on a road that's not used very often. Now, as a cyclist, you look for roads that aren't used very often because cars are a bit scary out on roads. So lots of cyclists are out there trying to ride on roads that don't have many cars. That's a disadvantage if you do actually have an accident or you get hit by a kangaroo because there's not many cars. So he's laying on the side of the road. He had a dislocated shoulder, he had broken ribs, and he had crushed vertebrae.
Oh, wow.
Not feeling great about the world around him.
Absolutely.
And the shoulder, that's a common thing that goes on a cyclist because you hit the ground with your shoulder off, and so popping the shoulder out is a common thing that happens. He's laying there in and out of consciousness, really not knowing what to do. He didn't realise it, but his watch made a phone call to his wife and to 000.
Oh, wow.
And he woke up vaguely in a daze to ambulance officers putting him into the back of the ambulance while his wife was there saying, "Are you okay, darling? Are you okay, Bruce?" So he didn't really know how all that happened. But, of course, watches have the ability, they've got an accelerometer in them, they detect a certain amount of G-forces, and then they'll say, something's happened. And I've had it happen to me when I've just been out riding, going over jumps on a mountain bike track, and my watch starts vibrating saying it's about to ring 000, and I've been able to say, no, I'm okay. So it has a slight delay from when it experienced certain G-forces.
Yeah.
If you're unconscious on the ground.
Would need that, otherwise emergency.
They'd get way too many. That's
yeah.
right. So he's laying on the ground. It's obviously popped up with a warning saying, hey, Bruce, I'm about to ring 000. Bruce was passed out, so Bruce didn't respond. So his watch automatically went and took those actions. Mate. So that was one good story. The other one, which is good from a perspective that someone was a bit cynical about these watches. There was a woman named Lexi. She was given a watch as a gift. And she went, I don't really want this. They're a bit over the top and I don't care about the features. She put it on, and before she knew it, she kept getting these notifications about her heart rate being too low. Now, I normally think about low heart rate as being someone who's quite fit. I look at Tour de France cyclists. They have very low resting heart rates into the 30s type thing. Yeah. So you think, well, gee, that's a good sign. You must be very fit, Lexi. Lexi wasn't overly fit and just dismissed it as stupid technology. This technology doesn't work very well. Keeps giving me these silly warnings. She went into a hospital visit, completely unrelated issue. It was just a minor thing she went in for. And she actually mentioned this stupid watch that she had, this technology keeps giving me low heart rate notifications. And the doctor said, that could be something. Let's do some tests. Did some tests, found she had a major blockage in her heart. She was operated on days later. Now, nothing had happened, obviously, but the doctor said that this sort of blockage was basically a heart attack waiting to happen any day now, and you might have been somewhere where you couldn't have gotten to the hospital quick enough.
Save this lady's life.
Exactly right. So they are useful for things like that, but just the fact they can monitor so many different things, I think that's the really important part here. So we're getting a lot more penetration. 1 in 4 Aussie adults have now got a smartwatch of some description, not the one brand, but just different brands of those. And some of them have different features depending on the exact brand you have. Some of them mightn't do what every other one does, but just being able to use those to monitor our health, I think, is a great thing. And some examples there about monitoring health in the short term.
Yeah, there you go. Xero. That's Xero for all our non-Kiwi listeners out there. Xero is a major accounting powerhouse in the land of the long white cloud, New Zealand. Well, like so many businesses these days, they've been looking towards AI for solutions in how to streamline processes and have developed a chatbot called Jax, or should I say Jex. Matt, how is Jex improving business for Xero? My apologies. No,
this is the poor New Zealand accent, is it? So
Jax, J-A-X.
J-A-X, yep. So Xero is actually, I don't have this data in front of me, but I'm sure it's the number one cloud accounting package in Australia and New Zealand. So,
in Australia and New Zealand, sorry.
Yeah, so
okay,
very well utilised. Developed in New Zealand. And New Zealand are quite good with their software development. So they've developed this, and lots of people go, wow, this is fantastic, built from the ground up as a cloud accounting package. Lots of things that you can use, different people accessing it, all sorts of things, because it's a cloud accounting package. And they were around before cloud accounting or cloud software became a really big thing, which obviously it is now. Always trying to work out ways to improve your accounting. So they've come up with this concept of a chatbot that you can use. And my favourite part of this chatbot, because I remember when I started out in small business, the most frustrating part of being a small business was you do all the work to get a client, you do the actual work for the client, and then getting paid for it should be really simple. But it was embarrassing. I used to feel embarrassed if you owed me money, I'd ring and say, James, if it's okay, could you pay me that money for that job that I did? Yeah, that sort of stuff. So it was always embarrassing, and I used to get frustrated with myself because I go, why am I embarrassed? This person owes me money, so I shouldn't be embarrassed. This person should be embarrassed. It shouldn't be me that's embarrassed. But you talk to small business owners, and the majority of them have that same problem, that chasing unpaid bills. That should be, forget about it. You've done the job. You've done all the hard work getting paid. So one of the things that they've done with Jax is that Jax can do a range of business processes for you, including chasing up people for money. Now, it won't be a phone call. So maybe that will be developed later. But at this stage, it'll be emails or it'll be WhatsApp messages. There'll be basically messaging processes to chase up that money. And of course, it's a chatbot. So we can have a conversation. The person comes back and says, oh, sorry about that, not knowing they're talking to a chatbot. Sorry about that. I'm waiting for this payment to come in. That'll be paid in 2 weeks. And so then you can fine-tune Jax in terms of how much attitude you want to give. Oh, that's not good enough. We did the job for you 3 months ago.
Send the boys around to break your fingers.
That's right. Not sure if it's got that option in there,
all right.
but that'd be a good option. My AI, virtual AI handbreaker will go around. I'm not sure, but that might get a few more bills paid.
I've watched too many British gangster movies.
That's right. So the idea of this is really just to change those processes. So it's not just overdue payments it'll follow up on. But if you've got things, for example, you've got an appointment with a bank, you're looking for another loan, and the bank will always say, okay, give me your cash flow projections. And sometimes you think, well, it's just made up stuff. Cash flow projections. Or how much do you want to see, Mr. Bank Manager? And I'll make sure it looks like that because cash flow projections are basically predicting the future. Yeah. But you can base it obviously on the past. And so cash flow projections, you want to see a graph, you want to see some information about that. Jax, can you give me cash flow projections for my meeting with the bank manager next week? Sure, I'll do that for you based on your past history and information in your accounting package because it's got access to all of that and then it can produce that. So any of the business processes that you do, you can finally, I think, get to the point where you can get rid of some of that drudgery. And in particular, Xero is really good with small businesses. A lot of people out there start the small business because they love doing the thing. They're a mechanic, they're a pastry maker, they're a whatever. They're a expert at that thing. They don't want to be doing all this mucking around with accounting work. It's a bit boring.
Yeah, I guess very few people start off with all the business qualifications and then get their idea for what they want to do and how they want to apply it.
That's right. Many people start off with, I love doing this. Yeah. I'll go and do this. And then, I've got to chase up bills and I've got to put cash flow in. That's all a bit of a pain. Unless you're an accountant starting a small business in accounting, that might be different. You might love doing all that. But for most people, the accounting side is a bit of drudgery. So that's what they're trying to do here. So we wonder, when people talk about AI and we think about big businesses, we think about this whole big sophistication with ChatGPT and OpenAI. But when it gets down to the stage where individual businesses, small businesses, one-person businesses, mum and dad businesses are starting to use AI in their daily jobs, you know that AI is really breaking through.
There you go. Batten down the hatches, folks. It's been a while since we talked about scams, but it seems, unfortunately, that the three certainties in life are death, taxes, and, of course, scamming. Now, the ACCC have proposed some changes to communication laws, and the telcos, who've been working hard to enable some protection for us in the way of scams there, have spotted a side door left totally ajar for potential scamming. Matt, what are the details, and how do you predict this is going to pan out for the average consumer?
This is something that's very unusual. I'm going to say something that I can't remember saying for a long time. The three telcos are united.
What?
It's not very often that happens. TPG, Telstra and Optus are all united in their opposition to the ACCC's proposed regulations. Now, the regulations could lead to more SMS traffic and obviously more SMS scam traffic. And that's the concern from the telcos. The ACCC doesn't see it the same way, as you can imagine. The bottom line here is that back in 2022, Aussies lost $3.1 billion to scams.
That's a lot of pocket money.
It is a lot of pocket money. And SMN scams are the preferred method by scammers. Very easy to do. You don't have to employ a robot to have a conversation with someone. That's a bit harder to do. You can do text generation quite easily.
And you only just need to catch one person in a loose moment.
Correct. And the ones, I think the most popular ones that I'm seeing at the moment are still the toll. You didn't pay your toll for someone in a metropolitan city that goes through tolls every day. Oh, no, I just can't pay that. The freight, the package, because people are getting delivered lots of freight, so you need to click on this link to make sure that package comes through. So ones like that, they're very clever at working out what lots of people are doing and then targeting those. So the draft regulations from the ACCC would require telcos to provide open access for bulk SMS message delivery. Now, they think that this is better for competition. They think the three telcos at the moment have it too locked down, and if you remove some of this control from the telcos, that would basically increase competition, which is what the ACCC is all about. Fantastic. But the three telcos say that once you start to open up these tools and give more open access, if you like, that will open up access to scammers to be able to get more access and better ways to send scams. Now, when you consider that 11 million SMS scams are blocked per month by Telstra. Wow. You can see why the telcos like the idea of having some further control over the messages that go out. So it's a bit of a battleground. ACCC.
Well, yeah, so if things get worse, it's going to be the telcos that come under fire for being too loose.
Possibly. So why did you let that message come through to me,
that's
Mr.
right.
Telco?
That's your fault. You've got to police that.
There's submissions being taken at the moment. Submissions still open at the moment as we speak. The government, via the ACCC, said that they might limit providers to registered entities as a way of addressing the concerns from the three telcos. So that might potentially reduce scam opportunities, but I'm not convinced in this. I don't know what's going to play out. The ACCC is usually the biggest gorilla in the room, so they're usually the one that wins. But the three telcos, I think, would have public sentiment on their side for basically trying to block some of those scams. So how's it going to play out? I'm not sure. I'm just trying to think which way I think it will go. I actually think in the end that the telcos will come out on top because I think so many people are so frustrated with scams. Yeah. I think public sentiment will push the ACCC to back away from their proposed regulations. More competition, great. But when you open up networks too much, you can probably get a few things.
It's a complicated sort of situation regardless, isn't it?
Absolutely right. So we'll keep an eye on this one. And when there is some decision made, and I can't imagine that's going to be made in the next week, it's going to be a long-term decision, more submissions to be made, more things to consider. Hopefully the ACCC's got some good technical advisors. They almost need to get people that have been scammers. And you see sometimes this with hackers, people that get arrested, go to jail, then they get a job in the industry to try and stop the next hacker. So they almost need some people that are SMS scammers that have been caught to say, okay, if we open this up, what would you do to get in and send more scams and see what happens there? But I'm not sure it's going to play out. We'll keep an eye on it.
Okay, folks, snorkels on. We're going for a dive. It's a well-known fact that we know more about the surface of the moon than the seafloor here on Earth. Truth be told, the bottom of the ocean just isn't obvious to us, and so fewer people have been caught up in the romance of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Until recently, that is, and now exploring the ocean floor has become big business. Sure, there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to roll the dice with some dodgy homemade vessels. Let's not go into that. But there is a great deal of ingenuity right now being directed into autonomous vessels. They can be built small, and if they're small, then they can be easily solar-powered for more convenience. Matt, this is actually quite an exciting space to watch right now.
It is actually, and you're right, 5% is the estimation of how much of the ocean floor we've actually mapped. So not much, basically. And some of it's a bit deep, some of it's a bit hard to get to, so you can understand why.
Yeah, and if you're in one little submarine with... and you're trying to scan the floor there and mapping the floor. Say one. There's lots of submarines out there. It's 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean water.
There's a lot, and unlike satellite images that we take of the Earth, it's pretty hard to get a submarine that can take anywhere near the same sort of size image because obviously it's a bit hard to see through the ocean floor or the ocean before you hit the floor. Now, you mentioned solar powered, and the first reaction that I would have when someone said we're going to solar power autonomous submarines is that someone's lost their mind because not a lot of sunlight gets through to the ocean or through
once
the
you
ocean.
get below about 3 metres, it starts to get pretty dark.
Exactly right. But this is exactly where one of the ways they're coming up with to power some of these autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs for us in the know, they talk about the fact that the typical silicon photovoltaic cells are optimised for the red spectrum. But the red spectrum is basically soaked up the earliest in the ocean.
Yeah, that's right.
When you start to look at green and blue parts of the spectrum, they've now got solar radiation that they can pick up with some solar panels at 50 metres.
Oh, right.
So that's not too bad. Now, again, the ocean's a lot deeper than 50 metres in spots.
But still, 50 metres is deeper than 3 metres. Yeah?
Exactly right. So what they're doing with these AUVs is they're going down as deep as they need to go, and they've got a certain amount of battery life, and then they come up. They don't have to come all the way to the surface. They can come up to, say, 50 metres below the surface and then recharge batteries and then go back diving again. You still do get some autonomous vehicles that are on the ocean top, on the actual top of the ocean, floating along the ocean, soaking up energy from the sun with normal photovoltaics, and then tethered to an autonomous vehicle underneath. So effectively it's a two-part autonomous, one below, one above, and then they're getting their power from there. So it can keep charging and stay down a lot longer.
Because I was interested about that because one of the issues, and I had an ex-student who was doing a bit of this, they're actually looking to develop radio communications with autonomous vessels underneath the ocean. And it's really hard. Once you get below about 30 centimetres of water, the radio waves don't have much effect. You sort of lose your radio contract. So having remote controlled things, they need to be tethered. There needs to be a line to the surface, and it makes sense. So if you've got a floating object on the top that is tethered to your little autonomous vessel that's scooting around the bottom, that makes a lot of sense.
And the radio waves you're talking about there, the way they typically do that is very low frequency.
Yeah.
So you can get some low frequency signals going through lots of water, but when you've got low frequency, you don't get much data. So trying to transmit a lot of information from way below when you've got very low frequencies, then that becomes a problem. It's a good little point, just a side point there, that people talk about their mobile phone, which are obviously very high frequencies. Mobile phone, what might block it? You get trees are quite effective at blocking signal because they've got a lot of moisture in them. So the water in those trees, sometimes people go into a wooded area. Wood itself doesn't absorb much electromagnetic signal. It's not like it's made of steel, but the moisture in those tree trunks is where a lot of that absorption happens.
Yeah,
so you lose a lot of that signal. Off topic slightly there, sorry. So
No, it's very interesting nevertheless.
the other thing that's a problem when they send these AUVs underwater for a length of time is that within 30 days, 50% of an AUV can be covered by biological fouling. So you've got underwater creatures who go, look at that thing, I can attach myself to that, and away they go, and they attach themselves to it. So you're losing a lot of your ability to take photographs or send out signals. So they're coming up with a new transparent, non-toxic coating that will stop things from sticking to it. So when it goes underwater and spends time under there, they don't have to keep bringing it back up to keep cleaning it off. They can leave it down for longer periods of time. Yeah, okay. So it's quite fascinating. You've got a range of things happening. Again, I talked about the one with a floating mothership. MIT has got a device called Pearl, which is doing that, for example. And there's another one called the SAUV-2, which looks a bit like a manta ray, and it dives down to 500 metres, takes images, gets information. It resurfaces to the surface to recharge this one, so it uses normal photovoltaics. It's got GPS, acoustic altimeters, and then transmits that data once it gets to the surface. So we're sending a lot more of these out there rather than having people out there to do it, to actually go and scan all this ocean floor and see what's out there. Maybe we'll see 20,000 leagues under the sea.
Well, we've got, as I said before, we've got submarines that are under there and they can do some sort of mapping as well. But talking to this student of mine, they were talking about, if you've got 50,000 of these things sort of scooting around the bottom, mapping the floor, you can get a lot of data there. Yeah. And you can map the ocean floor really, really in high definition.
As long as they've got good controls to not run into each other while they're
That's right.
travelling around.
But you just you up the ante quite a bit by having a volume of a flotilla. The concept of autonomous driving has certainly caused a stir in the motoring world. While Elon Musk has been brought down a peg or two, perhaps, with some unfortunate mishaps in this area emerging from the Tesla camp, the march towards autonomous traffic continues, and Waymo is an autonomous Californian taxi service and has been recently given the green light to expand its operations. Matt, there are some people with some very strong opinions about autonomous cars out there, but one lesson we learned from King Canute is that you just cannot hold back the tide.
You cannot. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what's happening here. So Waymo, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which obviously is the mother of Google, so just to make it more complicated. So basically Google owns Waymo, if you like, to make it easier for people. The California Public Utilities Commission has just given Waymo the permission to expand into additional counties. So you've got them in LA and San Francisco now, but very much in the city centre. But they've now said you can now start to expand that outside the city centre.
Okay.
I haven't been in an autonomous taxi yet, and I'm very disappointed that I haven't been because they're popping up in the US. So you've got them in San Fran and LA. You've also got them in Phoenix over there in the US. But in China, you've got them in Beijing and Shanghai. You've got them in Singapore. You've got them in Dubai and the UAE. And there are some parts in Europe where you're seeing some driverless taxis popping up as well. So I'm excited. I'm excited by all of that. I want to get in one and have a ride of one. I talked to a friend recently who had done exactly that, and he found it fascinating. You ordered the taxi on your app, and it turned up, and you got in, and you closed the door, and strapped in, and sat back, and away you went. So
now I know I've seen some stories, and I alluded to this in my introduction, but but there have been some stories where Waymo came a cropper. And it's taken a turn down a street and it's ended up in some wet cement and, a street that actually wasn't there or whatever. There have been some mishaps. But quite clearly, if they've been given permission to expand, then there's a lot more successes than failures.
Oh, definitely right, with the number of kilometres they've driven. And the cement one was a classic, and I think this is one of the examples I often use about how clever humans are. That particular incident where it drove into concrete, in looking around at surroundings and trying to judge where to go, and with all the algorithms written by humans to program this, you look at wet cement and you look at dry cement on a road, and you and I as humans are clever enough that we can just pick a subtle difference in that.
Yeah.
But a driverless taxi just saw that it was a slightly different coloured piece of road, so away it went and drove into it.
Yeah, but there must have been more than that. There must have been some signage or whatever that the driverless taxi has missed out on as well, surely.
I thought there would have been witches' hats there in the way, but sometimes witches' hats get knocked over or taken away.
Perhaps,
So you would hope there'd be something else there, because even for human drivers, you think there'd be the authorities putting up some warnings, but maybe they just finished for the day and they're packing up some things. I'm not sure exactly the circumstances, but again, you and I would go, that looks wet, I'm not going to drive into that.
Yeah.
A driverless taxi doesn't have a lot of experience seeing wet concrete, because on the roads, it's normally driving on dry concrete. So different colour, whatever, drive into it.
Well, the other thing is, and the flaw that people have been picking up on Elon Musk, is Elon Musk is one of those people who's willing to say, look, we're going to have some problems, things are going to happen, but, every time something happens, we'll work out a solution for it. So I'm assuming with all these places that are having driverless taxis pop up now, that we've got enough little things happening there to have learned some lessons, and that's why we're expanding now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they are learning. So now there'd be some line of code in there that says, look out for this type of colour on a road, because it could be wet concrete.
Every day, driverless taxis get safer and safer.
Get safer and safer. Now, here's the interesting part. If today you could click your fingers and say every car on the road is driverless, I think, personally, with no data to back me up, that our road toll would reduce dramatically. Because one thing that driverless taxis don't do, or lots of things they don't do, in terms of comparing to a human, you don't get distracted by a mobile phone. You don't get in and be a bit tired or fall asleep at the wheel. You don't just reach over on the ground to pick up that drink bottle that you dropped and then run into something. You don't drink alcohol before you're driving. Not too many driverless taxis are drinking alcohol.
Driverless taxis also have the capacity to talk to other cars as well, autonomous cars, and work out where they are as they're approaching an intersection to be able to communicate, and so they can move more fluidly and avoid collisions.
Well, even better, if every car on the road not just went driverless, but went driverless to the point it could do exactly that, that would be a much safer road. So our road toll went up last year. It's a bit sad in Australia that we are going, like 1,266 people lost their lives on Australian roads last year, which was an increase with all the advancements in cars that we've got and hopefully the improvements in roads. You would think our road toll would be going down, but going up is a bit scary. But if you had all those cars driverless, there would be some mistakes you'd see. There'd be someone who drove into wet concrete in the driverless car, or there'd be some accident that happened where the driverless car made a mistake. But I guarantee it would be less than if we have humans on the road as we do now, making all the mistakes that we make as humans.
I had one projection that there's even the opportunity to get rid of traffic lights. Because if driverless cars are all communicating, they're able to understand how to take turns.
Yeah, and that would be better because, yourself, there's times you sit at a traffic light, it's red, you look up and down the road, you go, I just want to go because it's green, but there's no cars here. I've got to wait. So it's wasting time. Whereas you're right, if all cars are communicating, the car could slow down at the intersection and communicate. I'm 120 metres away.
Effect, that you get. I don't know if people know what a traffic snake is, but it's where cars bunch up and then spread out and then bunch up and spread out and, avoiding all that,
And Mythbusters did a great episode of that, of snaking, showing how much that has an impact on traffic flow when you've got that snaking or the concertina effect in and out. So.
But I digress. Sorry, back to Waymo.
Waymo, so there is a bit of local resistance in some places, but the interesting part is that the state-level authorities, like the DMV and the CPUC, retain control over the road and taxi service, whereas the local city, they've got to do the roads and do the curb and guttering, but they don't get to decide on the regulations around taxis. So some local cities, some local government areas are unhappy about the expansion of the services because they're saying, we don't like it. Should we have some control? And the state government, the state equivalent, says, sorry, we are in control of taxi service and we're letting them expand. So there's a bit of friction out there still.
Okay.
But I think as we see more successes, that's when we'll see some of that friction go away. So it's happening. I think the big factors really will be public perception and acceptance, if you like, and the regulation. I think those two things will be, I don't think the technology so much will be the inhibitor, but those two things, public perception and the regulations to be able to do this. But it's an exciting world.
It is a very exciting world. Now here's a story from the files of the loaves and the fishes, folks. But far be it for me to stand on my pulpit and preach, we have a story of a modern-day miracle in 3D printing. With 6-month minimum between here and Mars, that's the flight minimum if you're on a rocket ship, feeding a hungry crew of colonisers will be less tricky now that we can print 3D salmon steaks. Now, this is just blowing me away. Here's a quandary for the vegans. Yeah? Meat on the menu, and I'll take mine boneless. Thank you very much, Matt.
So a few years ago, we talked about Israel producing lab-grown meat. It was the first factory production of lab-grown meat.
Dish.
In a Petri dish, that's right, starting from that and then growing out from there. And it's now being sold in some countries around the world, lab-grown meat. You can go into some supermarkets, and some spots and go lab-grown meat. And you talk about the vegan concept there. At that time, I did actually ask a couple of friends who are vegetarians, would you eat lab-grown meat? And so they were then in a bit of a quandary. It hasn't come from a live animal. And they might have had...
Well, one of the cells.
That's
came
right.
from a live-grown animal, but without harming the animal.
Without... Supposedly that needle didn't hurt too much. They took out that cell, so hopefully that's okay. But do you oppose eating meat based on the philosophical view of killing an animal, or do you oppose it because cows produce a lot of methane, which is bad for the climate, or you just don't like the taste of it? And I got mixed responses from a few people. I didn't have a large enough sample space to say anything definite there, but lab-grown meat was fascinating. The next one we talked about, which was probably 6 months after that, we talked about a molecular beverage printer that you could walk up to and press the button and say, I'd like this drink, and it produces that. I think we talked about at the time then 92 naturally occurring elements. Does that sound right?
82 naturally occurring elements, I believe, yeah.
Okay. So everything's made up of 118 elements, but the naturally occurring elements, and effectively it's probably 10 elements that most things are made up of. Yeah. So you just mix those the right way, which sounds simple. You get whatever you need to get. So take that basic concept and then we should be able to 3D print anything at all. A bit more complicated than that, of course, but we're seeing now in Austria, a startup has started doing 3D printed salmon. And it sounds really good to just put in a bunch of elements, 10 elements into a machine and away you go. But of course, they don't do that. It's a bit more complicated to do it from that. It's a bit easier to use things that are already a compound. So vegetable proteins are typically used for salmon fillets. So they're vegan. They're not from a live animal. Are they the same tasting? Well,
yeah, that's what people get very fussy about their food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the time when this will really start to take off is when you put a blindfold on someone and say, taste this and taste that. And if they can't pick the difference, you know you're on a winner. I haven't tasted it, so I can't say whether or not it is or it isn't. But part of the problem is we talk about various fishing grounds collapsing. One of the discussions is that some fishing grounds there at the moment, by 2050, you'll have more plastic than fish in some of these areas there where they're fishing for things like salmon. So we need to find some other ways to keep feeding the world.
I just find this absolutely remarkable.
It is, isn't it? So 3D printing meat, fish is a viable alternative. So you basically take the fish, if you like, or the vegetable proteins, so like microproteins, fungal filaments, and that's to mimic the texture.
You put your omega-3s in there as much as you want to.
Exactly right. So basically 12 ingredients they use to produce these pea protein, plant oils, algae extracts, and that's how you make them out. But then you also have a company in Singapore doing 3D printed squid rings. And they're supposedly replicating the texture, flavour and elasticity. Now, with calamari, you always get that little bit that gets stuck between your teeth because there's some little stringy bit. Have they produced that?
A little bit of rubber band that snaps back and slaps you in the cheek.
That's it. That's exactly it. You've eaten the same place I've eaten it. So when you eat those, it's got that same feel. So they say they're actually recreating that same texture and elasticity. So you can actually fry them in an air fryer. They've done tests with that. They haven't got a battered version yet, but they're still working on that. I suppose the big thing here is that if we can't produce calamari rings in our normal way, can't produce salmon in our normal way, 3D printing it or producing it some other way makes sense. But then you start to say, well, what about the raw materials? How do you produce the raw materials to then go to make those? Is there a good ecological way that's reproducible to make those? I suppose that's the next challenge.
Yeah.
If we started producing all our salmon via a 3D printer, well, where do you get all the materials from? Can we get
right.
those easily?
Yeah.
So it's quite fascinating though, isn't it? There are some, it's almost like driverless cars. We need the acceptance from the public and we need the regulations to be able to start doing this. But don't be surprised when you walk into a supermarket and see 3D printed items that you wouldn't normally see.
We're talking about people long-term in space, spending long-term in space to be able to pack your food really tightly because it's all in essentially like a powdered form that you can then print your own food. We're at that stage where we can print food. It's great.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. Now, before you go on to the next story, I just did the maths in my head, and 92 naturally occurring elements is correct.
Okay.
Uranium is 92,
right,
and it decomposes to create all the ones between it and 82. So I'm just want to throw that in there.
Good. So 92, so that was correct. 92.
Yeah, 92 is very good, yeah.
So, but it is fascinating, isn't it, when you think about that? Because I look at you, I look at me, I look at the studio we're in, I look at the microphone I'm talking into, and you go, what? 92 different things made up all of that. It doesn't make sense, but there's a fair few ways to rearrange those 92.
Together for sure.
That's right.
Groucho Marx once said, "I never forget a face, but in your case, I'll make an exception." Now, how do you go recognising people? So many people are quick to confess that they can never remember people, but consider that we're evolutionary programmed to just recognise faces full stop. Well, just imagine this. Imagine recognising an old friend by the markings on their dorsal fin. Apparently, that's the best way to recognise a humpback whale friend. And so AI has been recruited to do regular whale roll calls in a bid to track changing migratory patterns in warming oceans. Matt, a novel and productive use of AI for sure.
AI for sure. And more than that, it's actually quite interesting because they're using citizen scientists to contribute to the database. So part of the problem is we have a decline in particular, North Pacific humpback whale population. Over the last decade, they've lost about 20%. So that's obviously a concern. Trying to track these whales to try and study them is obviously sensible and see what the population is doing. But it's obviously a fair bit of work to go and tag whales, going around with a scientists and tagging whales and seeing where they go to and trying to track them. But they've got to the point now by using AI, it's like facial recognition, but using, as you said, the dorsal fin. It's a bit harder to get a photo underwater of the smiling face of the whale.
Yeah.
But a dorsal fin obviously is above water from time to time because it needs to get oxygen. So it's a process they're doing, but it's better than just scientists going out and taking photographs and then putting them into a database. As I mentioned, citizen scientists are able to take photo, and there's a platform called Happy Whale, all one word, HALPY Whale, Happy Whale. And so you can upload your photos there and obviously the location where you took that photo.
There you go.
That all goes into the database. So then scientists can look at all that information using AI and say, well, here's Mary the whale, and she was over here 3 months ago and over there. It looks like they're changing their patterns because the biggest concern, well, it used to be obviously hunting of whales. That's stopped, or at least we hope it's been stopped in most places.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that.
Well, it's been banned, but whether it's stopped or not, I suppose, is a crucial part there. So that's helped the population of whales, but the next big thing, of course, is the heat in the ocean, and that's what's causing a bigger issue now. So they're finding that some of the areas they would expect these whales to be in, they're no longer there, and they're in different areas. Again, the whales are probably moving around trying to find where the ocean is the right temperature for them. So having photographs, having a tracking process to see where these whales are now and to see where they stay throughout the year is quite fascinating. So all these whales, they've got about 200,000 whale photographs that have been taken over the last 2 decades to track some of these whales, where they're moving, and keep track of these different whales. So
I love the concept of citizen scientists as well. Everyone gets an opportunity to be a part of something much bigger.
Yeah, exactly right. Just to give you some numbers to scare you as well, the peak population we've seen over the last couple of decades was 33,488. Very precise number for the number of whales. I don't know they filled in a census, but that was in 2012. In 2021, so less than a decade later, it was down to 26,662.
Yeah.
That was obviously after whales, hunting for whales has been banned. So they think that some of the problems here is just the fact that ocean temperatures have changed. their food sources have changed, and so whales have got to either adapt or move to new areas where they can still consume food and be able to get access to that food, I suppose, is the critical thing there. So quite fascinating. AI facial recognition for whales. Who would have thought?
Absolutely. Now, we're still swimming about ocean stories. If you've ever been swimming in the ocean and emerged from the surf dressed in seaweed debris, at that moment you probably cursed the kelp gods all the way to hell. But spare a thought for the enormous ecological importance of kelp forests in our oceans. Marine ecologists are trawling the tech industry for innovative ways to monitor kelp forest depletion in warming waters and to develop a higher level of resilience for this crucial primary trophic producer. Matt, some important work being done there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And we've got this great southern reef of kelp in Australia that goes
Tasmania.
It goes from WA right along the bottom of Australia, right
okay.
through to Queensland and around Tasmania. So a lot of kelp there.
Oh, I did not know that was that big.
Yeah, yeah. And again, obviously there's more around Tasmania because kelp prefers those colder temperatures, so that makes sense. But there is kelp all the way around there. That's reducing, but the bigger problem is around Tasmania, as you correctly pointed out, the kelp population there. Water temperatures are rising at 4 times the global average rate. So there's about a 95% loss of kelp forests around eastern Tasmania in particular. So this is all bad. What we need is to see some way we can look at this and then try and address it in some way, shape or form. You team up CSIRO, the Nature Conservancy and Google, using Google's 1 billion digital futures initiative, then you start to get at least some tracking of this. Now, it's pretty hard to see it. If you went to the Daintree and knocked out the Daintree forest in Australia above land and took out 95% of that, some people would notice that. When it's under the ocean, then it's not quite so easy to see. But that's where researchers are using a whole range of things, including satellite images, high-res satellite images with some machine learning to actually automate the kelp tracking and to see exactly how much kelp we've got, to see how much it's reducing by.
Okay.
Scientists don't have an answer, a solution at this stage, but at least if we work out what's happening, that's the first step to...
Yeah, it's about collecting data, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So they're trying to get to the point where they cover 7,000 square kilometres of our coastline to get some insight to that using older photographs going back about 8 years and then continue to go forward. So it is good use of AI, good use of our technology, but unfortunately we're still looking at the point where we're losing this, so we've got to work out some way to solve it. Now, kelp can grow rapidly. It can grow up to 10 metres in a single year. So if we can solve the problem and come up with some sort of process, and one of the things they're looking at is studying the DNA of kelp specimens, looking at DNA of kelp that can survive better in warmer temperatures, and then using that DNA. This sounds like GMO. It's going to scare people now, doesn't it? But yeah, basically taking that DNA and accelerating that DNA, so preferring that DNA for future production of kelp to try and get kelp that will survive in warmer waters. So we are a bit underwater today, aren't we? I did notice that.
No, and I'm loving the theme to this episode, yeah.
Yeah, and it is something that we probably don't know much about it because we can't see it. It's a bit harder to see what's underwater, but there's certainly a lot of importance for our overall planet.
And something like a kelp forest is something that is easily overlooked by the general public, and why would you get interested in kelp? But it's a real important marker for the health of your ocean. Yeah,
and I assume the biodiversity there as well for what's produced from the kelp for various fish that then might ultimately lead to enough whales in our oceans because the food chain might start from something that feeds on kelp. So, yeah, very important.
It's Olympics time again, and I love it. Once every 4 years, I get right into rowing and high jump and badminton and diving and all the sports, and I go full bore into researching all the competitors and the ins and outs and all that sort of stuff. I'm an expert in all fields, and I cannot get enough. Except equestrian dressage. I just can't get into that. Apologies to the dressage listeners out there. Now, I guess it's just a sign of the times, though. You cannot hold a tea party these days without security. And there'd be a few tea parties these days that could rival the enormity of the security required to keep people safe at the Olympics. Matt, how are they going to employ tech to keep people safe in Paris in August?
There are some interesting sports, aren't there?
There are a lot of breakdancing, I believe, is entering into the Olympics. I might not do a whole lot of research on breakdancing. I'll wait till it's
I saw a new segment
longevity
on that one the other day, and one of the breakdance competitors was a woman who is a professor, and she's got her PhD in breakdancing.
There you go.
And she's got her students who are pretty
She
excited.
knows how to bust out the cardboard.
She does. She's got her students excited that their professor at university is going to the Olympics for breakdancing.
Amazing.
So it is.
You can get a degree and a master's and a PhD in anything.
In anything, that's right. So we do need security, though, because lots of people target the Olympics because guess what? The world's watching the Olympics, including you and I watching every obscure sport that's there that we won't hear about again for 4
I just
years.
love it because, it's something for things that you just never get to see ever.
That's right.
You can just tune in and go, wow.
But someone that's there representing their country, that's their focus. It's been their focus
That's
for
right,
years and years,
for
maybe
sure.
their entire life.
Yes. And you can definitely pick the difference between a kayak and a canoe.
That's right.
Yeah. So, it's amazing.
It is. But security is important.
Yeah, that's right. And it's such a big deal now.
It is.
As I said, holding a tea party, there's got to be security at it.
Yeah.
And so, the Olympics is just something out of this world as far as a headache for the people in charge of this.
Correct. And as you can imagine, France is a little bit worried because as the world progresses and as security becomes more and more important and activists want to take advantage of things, then
Yeah, you want to make a statement.
it gets a bit scary. So they've got at the moment some AI-powered surveillance cameras they're testing that they want to deploy for the 2024 Paris Olympics. 6 AI cameras, not many, and they've got those at one of their arenas that is used for various sporting events now, including various concerts that might be there. And what they do with those cameras is they're looking out for 8 specific types of incidents. So, for example, counterflow in crowds. So I assume counterflow is people going the other direction.
A salmon trying to swim in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So counterflow in crowds, unauthorised access. Okay, that makes sense. Crowd density. So if you get too many people gathering in a certain area, that might be a bit of an issue. Abandoned packages. Good one. I like that one. So
what's that?
Abandoned packages.
Yeah.
So AI goes, there's a package, no one's staying near it, and no one's been near it for the last 28 seconds. Alert, alert, alert. So that's a good one to look for. Weapons, makes sense. Overcrowding and individuals on the ground, as in on the sporting arena. And the last one is fires. Now, you'd think that, well, that's pretty easy. Surely the various security personnel, police can pick up these things. At the opening ceremony, there are going to be 30,000 police officers on duty at the opening ceremony. I imagine the crowd's going to be 100,000. So you've got this 3-to-1 ratio of patrons to the police officers. So you think that'd be enough. But the idea of all these security cameras, if they do what they hope to do with their testing, they'll be looking out for all of this. And then they can say, alert, alert, section G7, there's a counterflow incident happening. Yeah. And then some of these 30,000 police officers can go there and see what's happening. So the AI is not going to be used to charge someone, convict someone in court. It's going to be used to alert people that something might be happening. That's at one arena. Obviously, the idea here is to have AI employed across many arenas and have an effective way of keeping an eye on things. Unfortunately, it could be after an incident has happened, but a lot of this is about looking for potential. So again, an abandoned package is potential. Counterflow incident is potential. So they're looking for all of that. The interesting part is that there are some people not happy about this. Back in October 2023, 65 British lawmakers and the European Union called for a ban on live facial recognition technology. Now, that's people are very worried about my face being used and recorded somewhere I don't want it to be. This sort of thing, I think it's not so much I'm looking for Matthew Dickerson because he's a bad person coming into the crowd. It's looking for behaviours. So I think it's a little bit different. And I suppose the people are aware of these concerns from the public and from lawmakers, so they're trying to address that by not looking out for individuals, although I'm sure the technology is there. If they know of someone that's a certain operator, then they might have an alert go to some officers around them when that certain operator walks on in. Yeah. It's interesting, but we just are seeing more and more AI, more and more facial recognition around the world. It's going to be hard to disappear, as you see in the movies when someone suddenly disappears off the face of the earth, because you've got to have to be out of sight of every camera around the whole planet.
Fans of George Orwell are going to be going ballistic.
Exactly right.
Right. And now, with a bunch of renovators moving in on us here in the studio, we'd better make ourselves scarce before we're smothered by a drop sheet. That was unexpected, mate.
Well, I'm actually a bit keen to go and have some salmon with some calamari now. I haven't got any 3D printer, but I've got a bit of salmon and calamari in the fridge, and I'm just getting a bit hungry now after talking about this.
Well, thanks for another sensational and educational Tech Talk, Matt. I need to go and rinse the salt water out of my hair after today's episode before I rust away to a bare chassis of my former self. Some big ideas to impact 2/3 of the Earth's surface nonetheless. Thanks for tuning in once again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. This humble little podcast continues to motor on, and we're both terribly grateful for the opportunity to do so. I'm James Eddy, wishing you a wonderful week ahead and hoping that you may have a spare 45 minutes or so to do it next week. Give us another go with a brand new episode of Tech Talk. Bring along a friend. We'll see you then.